Thank you for joining us for another installment of Future of Blockchain. Richard Dulude, one of the co-founders and partners of Underscore VC, here with Josh Cincinnati of Zcash Foundation.
Howdy.
Yeah,
Hey.
thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Cool.
Great to be here.
So, I'd love to start out and ask, what brought you into this wild world of crypto?
Yeah, so honestly, as is usually the case with opportunities like this, it was a great deal of serendipity. So I co-founded an Android application startup that was a big failure, as those things often are. What is entrepreneurship without failure?
What was the startup?
It was called, so the company name was OneSpire. The idea behind it was we wanted to take your lock screen and wallpaper and figure out kind of better content for you, and then it would be, a great opportunity to take up some landscape on people's cell phones. And this was way back in
That's a pretty valuable landscape.
Yeah, I think so. So that was like in 2011 to 2013. And I had the really good fortune of hiring an Android engineer who was very early on into the Bitcoin talk forums. And when we were kind of, at the water cooler, so to speak, talking about things, he basically just introduced me to this world. And I had previously had a politics and math background, so I was immediately queued up, like I was primed to just be obsessed about this stuff. So after his introduction, I just went into the rabbit hole. After that company, after it failed, I ended up joining BlockCypher to be a developer advocate there. Did that for about a year and a half, and then ended up joining up. I had a brief stint at Lyft, but while I was at Lyft doing dev advocacy, I part-time volunteered at the Zcash Foundation, turned into a part-time job, turned into running the Zcash Foundation. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. But yeah, it was really just sort of luck and a certain, I think, mentality and personality. The other thing I think contributed to that is I graduated business school in 2009, and consequently I have a high degree of skepticism about our financial system, which was
understandably.
So I think that also informed my perspective of that as well.
I think it did for a lot of people too. Great. Well, tell me a bit about the Zcash Foundation, what you guys are looking to achieve, kind of the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, as you could guess by the name, we're deeply associated with the Zcash protocol. The protocol itself is all about basically trying to create electronic cash in the truest sense online, in that cash is really fundamentally anonymous, it's private. You can engage in cash transactions without having to ask anyone's permission. And Zcash, the way that it has been built, particularly as people start adopting the shielded addresses component of Zcash, very much has those properties. And so, originally the Zcash company, which is now known as the Electric Coin Company, they've changed their name a little bit. But they were the ones that have done the vast majority of protocol development. They are the ones that took the academic papers that existed beforehand from Zero Cash and converted it into an actual running in production protocol. And the foundation was created basically to be a counterbalance to the company. Originally, just sort of, we started off just doing some exploratory grants, but now we are now growing to a point where we want to act as a kind of hedge against and a check against the company's power, because I think something that's on the mind of lots of people in this world is how can you build a protocol where there isn't just sort of unilateral control over the direction of the protocol and governance. So that's the main purpose of the foundation. But right now is about being at hedge. I think long term, we're all about our mission is all about privacy preserving payment protocols online. It's a bit of a mouthful.
It is.
But yeah, so that's our long term goal.
You mentioned the concept of a shielded address. Is this default for everybody who's using Zcash?
So not right now. Right now, there are effectively like two classes of addresses on Zcash and or transaction. Well, technically there are three kinds of transactions you can engage in, but two kinds of addresses. So the two addresses are transparent addresses and then Z addresses. If you engage in a Z address to Z address transaction, that is theoretically speaking the most private transaction you can engage in any blockchain protocol today. The issue particularly prior to the sapling hard fork upgrade, was that it was pretty computationally intensive to make a proof to do that sort of transaction. It required a lot of RAM. So most people that were interacting with it were doing so on the command line with their private keys still connected online. It was kind of an onerous experience. And so a lot of people, in order to make it easier for people to integrate with the Zcash ecosystem and also to help with sort of auditing the supply, there's these transparent addresses, and those addresses are effectively just like Bitcoin addresses.
Gotcha.
So if you do a transparent to transparent transaction,
we can see it.
Everyone can see it. It's on the blockchain. But then there is this weird intermediate where you can actually do a transparent to a shielded address, or a shielded to a transparent address. And in that case, it's like you from a transparent address to a shielded address, you can see the origin of the funds, you can see how much, but then it goes into this giant shielded anonymous pool, and vice versa for the other type of transactions.
So a big piece of this is steering community, thinking about community. Tell me a bit about how you're thinking about that in the context of Zcash. Is it focused on development, use, integrations? What does it look like?
So I think the biggest two pieces for us right now are distributing out development power and getting the community more involved in developing software and services on top of Zcash, and in terms of doing like core development as well. And then usage and getting more user-friendly applications. Because I think one of the biggest roadblocks to adoption of a lot of privacy technologies, but even just Bitcoin and kind of the older mainstays, is usability is still it's still very hard. It's very hard to convince people and to walk them through how to do this. You have to really want to do it.
It's clunky. I'm not going to get my grandmother to do this thing.
Me too. I gave my parents like a paper wallet, and I don't think they really understood what I was doing when I gave
threw
them
it in the trash.
Probably. Oh well, I guess that benefits the broader community. So less supply.
Cool. Well, tell me a bit about Zcash is successful. You create an anonymous money for the internet. What does the world look like when you solve the problem?
Honestly, and this is why I joined the foundation, I think the world would be a more just and fairer place in that kind of world where everyone has access to private financial transactions. Because the way that I view it, there's all this negativity associated with anonymous and private approaches to currency. Everyone always says, "Oh, well, only criminals will use it," or it's money laundering, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth of the matter is that right now, only the ultra wealthy have access to actually private funds and private pools of money. And to me, it's a matter of like equality of opportunity. It's unfair that there's some people that have that level of privacy that is, in my view, also constitutionally guaranteed in the U.S., but practically speaking doesn't exist because of the way that we, as normal citizens, interact with banking infrastructure, and that's unfair. It's totally unfair. There's so much about our financial system that's unfair, and in a world where people are actually using regular people are using private currency, that would be a fairer world to me. A world where it's not just the ultra wealthy that have access to that. And to respond to the idea that only criminals will use it, I think the same debate happened in the 90s about encryption in general. And there are all these the push for the Clipper chip and all these terrible ideas that would have weakened encryption. And now there are multi-trillions of dollars of market capitalization that are effectively guaranteed by TLS and secure websites. So I think that the same kind of benefit will accrue to society as a whole, even with those potential negative uses.
Yeah, that's great. I completely agree. Are you ready to jump into rapid fire questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll keep myself to concise
responses. You don't have to. That's the fun part of it. Cool, the rapid fire are for me, but they don't have to be for you. Fair. So tell me about top factors hindering blockchain adoption.
Absolutely, like usability, I think. Usability, and frankly, once that problem is solved, if that problem gets solved, then the problems of scale come up, almost by necessity, because everyone starts using it all of a sudden people are going to realize there's limited space, my fees are going up, why is this happening? Like, why can't I engage in this, DApp or transfer money without paying $20 or $30 or something in fees? So that's going to be the very next thing that we have to deal with, I think.
So what would break us through in terms of usability?
I think, honestly, having a device, it might be a hardware device plus a companion app or something, but having something that still guarantees the degree of decentralization that's necessary for these things to continue to be innovative. So where someone can run their own node, their own Bitcoin, their own Zcash, their Ethereum node. They can run their own node from their home, still trust. Only trust their own, their own infrastructure, and then easily connect their mobile device and engage in transactions that easily. And then, frankly, the other challenge, which I think is going to be really, really difficult, at least when it comes to like physical retail adoption, I do think it's very easy to make any sort of blockchain-related payments seamless online. Like it's much easier to do that. The real challenge then comes in like, okay, let's say you actually do capture that world. How do you then translate that into a physical experience that's better than Apple Pay? And I don't know. Like that's a very difficult problem to solve.
Yeah, cool. Let's talk about mining. Is it too centralized today, or is it decentralized?
I think everything can always be more decentralized,
okay.
And particularly like mining, there are a lot of problems with the way that mining works today. The main problem is that miners really have the opportunity to order or censor transactions as they see fit. Most of them haven't been doing that because they ultimately there's enough of a competitive environment that they can't effectively censor transactions most of the time. But that's still like a possibility, and there are one of the best proposals I've seen to deal with this is Matt Corallo's better hash proposal on the Bitcoin side, where you kind of split up if you're in a pooled mining environment and you have your mining rig and everyone else's, and it's one single operator. In the current world, that operator gets to choose what transactions get included. You're just lending hash power. In Matt's proposal, the idea is that each individual, node, or not node necessarily, bad name collision, but each participant, they would be able to determine transaction inclusion, and the pool wouldn't really be able to change that. So I'm really optimistic that those sorts of developments will actually re-decentralize mining.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. So do you think today an average person can participate as a miner?
No, it's almost, it's kind of like the problem of actually using these things for transactions, but magnified, because it requires even more expertise and more, I think, banging your head in a wall just to get it set up. So it's very difficult for people to do that today.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. And so let's look at a year. Yeah. Do you think mining is going to become more centralized or more decentralized in that year?
I think it largely depends on whether stuff like better hash gets legs. Like if it actually has momentum behind it, and people start integrating that or something like that, I think that there's a chance for, even if certain pool operators become bigger, if the individual participants in the pool wind up reasserting their power that way, then that's going to have a huge effect. So I could see it, if that happens, I could see it getting more decentralized. I think that sort of there's this natural kind of tendency to scale otherwise for economies of scale that leads to centralization of mining, and it's something that we always have to be cognizant of.
So that brings me to scalability. Lots of work around proof of stake, do you think scalability will be solved this year? I mean, the first proof of stake networks kind of succeeding, or
I think it's going to be an open question that will continue to be developed and worked on for probably the next decade, to be honest. I don't think there's anyone who's selling a silver bullet is making there's like inherent compromises that are made when those sorts of things develop, and I think that the right approach is going to probably take like the better part of decade to actually to figure out, But honestly, like in the scale, like the kind of scale that we're looking at for these technologies, like these are, one of the other speakers today, I think it was Arjun, like made a point that like most of these blockchains, what people are trying to build are like generation spanning technologies, which is very different from what most startups like are trying to build with their products. So if you're trying to build like a generation spanning protocol or product, like I think it makes more sense to like try and find the right balance over the course of a longer period of time, rather than like potentially trying to growth hack it, in the next year or two. But I don't know. I think as a result of all of the additional focus the space now has, there's a huge incentive for lots of people to innovate, and so it could be that my rather like pessimistic view on that time frame, it could be way off.
Yeah, we'll find out. Yeah. Are you layer 1 fan, layer 2 fan?
Oh, I think they both have their place. Okay. Yeah, like I don't think it makes sense to really optimize completely for just a layer 1 protocol. I don't think it makes sense to optimize, just put all of your eggs in the layer 2 basket. Like you have to do both. You have to develop both.
Cool. Stable coins, big deal, stupid.
Oh man, this is not the official view of the Zcash Foundation.
Good.
This is my own personal
views. Good.
Yeah. Oh man, I think they're all smoke and mirrors.
Okay.
I think it's just gonna all end in tears. One of my favorite case studies from back when I was in business school was long-term capital management, or LTCM.
Yeah, of course.
And the real lesson behind LTCM is that even if you get a bunch of geniuses in the room and you make grand claims about how you can completely eliminate risk, you can't. And my view about most stablecoin protocols is that at least, in theory they sound great, but they ultimately, at an abstract level, are all about moving around and hiding risk. And the more that you seem to be able to do that, and the more stable it appears, the more hidden explosive risk there is elsewhere in the system. That's not like a strict mathematical proof, but that's been informed by that scenario.
I think it's a fair comparison.
Yeah. So I mean, but we'll see. I honestly, like, when it comes to, because there is this distinction between like algorithmic stablecoins and people that just have like audited reserves that are one-to-one matched by some like embedded protocol on a given blockchain. And even though the part of me that wants permissionless, the permissionless finance dislikes the idea of there being a central authority that is mandating
that's the whole premise of the Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's like to get rid of those central authorities. So I dislike that aspect of it. But from a perspective of wanting people to be able to engage in some kind of fiat, like on-ramp, I think that's actually like a better approach compared to trying to do stuff like algorithmically, where I really feel like you're just going to wind up, something's going to blow up at some point. So,
that makes sense.
But again, that's personal opinion,
not
the foundation.
The debate is out, which is good. Well, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
So on that vein, sovereign crypto assets, do you think they'll exist? The ruble coin, the US coin, the...
Yeah, but I think they'll exist, but they really shouldn't be called cryptocurrency, They're going to be, I think they're just going to be improvements that should have probably been made by all of these central banks, like, eons ago, but they're now finally facing competition for assets that can be traded seamlessly, electronically. So there's this real desire for them to finally get up to speed. And in that regard, I think they're gonna happen, but I would hesitate to call them cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
They're going to be like more improved, more accessible banking APIs, maybe would be a better definition in my view. But they're going to happen. I think there is a degree of inevitability around that. I wonder to what degree they will actually be competitive with native cryptocurrencies. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be the great battle.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Good. Do you think U.S. regulation is clear for startups operating in this space?
No. I think there's a lot of there's certainly a lot of regulation around securities that actually is quite clear and can apply to lots of people building things in this space. But once you start getting into the realm of assets that are automated to a certain degree, where there's no human interaction on how that automation takes place, I don't really think there's enough guidance from any regulatory authority on how to deal with that. I'm just very glad that seemingly there's been a lot of it's been very light touch in the U.S. in general, with some notable exceptions, but they have been very friendly toward new ideas and applications and for various blockchain approaches. And it'd be really saddened if that took a turn. But right now, there's still ample amount of ambiguity that people can still operate in this space. But that ambiguity brings with it a lot of risk, and it would be great if there was more clarity, I think.
It's tough.
Yeah.
No, it's tough.
Yeah.
So final question would be, what's a project or a cool company that you respect and admire in this space?
There's so many. Honestly, it's hard to pick just one. But if I had to, obviously outside of the electric coin company and Zcash Foundation, but if I had to pick one, I think Casa is probably the most interesting. What they're doing, and in general their mission to maintain kind of individual sovereignty as a service, is extremely appealing for I think the cypherpunks among us that continue to work in the industry, because they're trying to build that bridge between people still running their own infrastructure, but having a user-friendly, completely streamlined approach to securely interacting with crypto assets. So I think I'm like most impressed by what they've been building and what they've been doing.
Well, good. We're talking with Jeremy later today.
Oh, great. That's wonderful. That's awesome.
Good.
Yeah,
well, Josh, really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, great being here,
Thank you
Rich.
for
Thanks
it was
so
really
much for
fun
having me.
conversation.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.